Hi, everybody. This is Alice Osborne, and we are the June Wonderland Book Club, and we have Dori and Dupre, who is our featured author. I am so excited to introduce you to her. We had her discuss Scout's Honor in 2018 in August, and 3 years later, she's here with Good Buddy, which came out in 2019. And we've been waiting for this for a long time, and I'm so excited that the day finally came for us to discuss Good Buddy. A little bit about our friend here. Dori is the author of, I just mentioned Scout's Honor, which was an award winning debut novel. And she has also published several short stories and poems. She serves as a contributing blogger to the Hope for Widows Foundation and is the founder of the Grieve the Right Way grief writing workshops. She's the proud mother of two daughters. She works full time. She's a veteran of the United States Army, and she currently resides in the beautiful town of Hillsborough, North Carolina. 2019 was a great year for Good Buddy. It was a Reader's Favorite International Book Award winner, and it's a story about family, secrets, loss, and life, and the special bonds we have with our fathers. And Father's Day was last Sunday, so perfect timing there. About stepfathers and surrogate fathers. Family does not have to be defined by blood. And the story was written for her husband, Eric, who unfortunately passed away and who was himself a good buddy. And he was able to read the novel before he passed, which is really special. And let me get Dori back on here, and she's going to take it away. All right, and here is Dori.
I'm never comfortable with being my big face on the computer. I think, like all writers can probably identify, a lot of us are introverted, so it's very uncomfortable. I want to make a correction. I don't know what bio I sent you, but I do not live in Hillsborough. I've never lived in Hillsborough. I live in Raleigh, but I did live in Pittsburgh for a long time. So maybe there was just a little confusion in whatever I sent. But I'm so happy to be here with you all. I had a wonderful time with you. I guess it was almost 3 years ago, talking about Scout's Honor. And at that time, I think I was a couple years out from releasing that book. And so it's kind of nice doing a book club after your book's been out a little while, because you can, you've received some feedback, you've had other conversations about it. And so you feel a little bit more comfortable with what you're talking about and how the book has been received. I think a lot of times when you're doing a book right when it comes out, sometimes you're just, as many of you know who are also writers, you're just terrified what someone's going to say to you about your book, and reading some of those reviews, or I think I've stopped reading reviews because it's kind of depressing sometimes. And not to take that personally, you can get one bad review and then 60 wonderful reviews, and all you can think about is that one bad review when someone's told you you're a terrible writer. So anyway, but again, thank you for having me. I hope that anyone who's been here, who has read, if you have read the book, that you enjoyed it. Was talking a little bit with Alice offline this morning, and she had talked about one of the characters reminded her of her own life, and so I know that I like when my books can make people relate to something else that they've experienced in their lives. And so Good Buddy came out in June of 2019 on Father's Day. And as Alice said, it is a book about fathers. And in particular, in this story, was about a man who became a stepfather, and how he met a woman named Julie, and how he helped her raise her daughter as his own. In this book, Molly is the name of the little girl, and her father died in a training accident. He was a paratrooper in the Army, and died in a training accident. And so Buddy came into her life when she was about 6 years old. And but he has his own dark secret and his own demons that he's fighting from his own past. And if you've read the book, you know what those are. But I did want to highlight some different kinds of fathers in the story. Buddy, as you know, was he became a stepfather, and then he also became a biological father at some point. He became a single father at some point. And then he also experienced he lost his father as a little boy, very young, doesn't have many memories of him during Vietnam. And then he had a stepfather who had his own demons. And then he had a man who kind of stood in his life who was a surrogate father also. And I wanted to highlight those kinds of relationships because I don't think a lot of times in fiction that we focus on I think a lot of female writers, especially, we write about mother issues and mothering and all of our challenges and our frustrations with being women who feel like we're not heard in this world. But I think there's a lot of men out there who have taken on these very important roles of fatherhood, and they don't get enough credit for it, and it does society a great good. And so that's kind of what I wanted to highlight throughout this book. Many of you know my publishing journey. I published my first novel, Scout's Honor, in 2016. About 60 days before that novel was to come out, my husband was diagnosed with terminal colon cancer. And he was 46 years old at the time, and it came out of left field. We were all extremely shocked. I think last year, many of you know I think he was 43, the actor Chadwick Boseman, who played Black Panther and many other roles. He died out of nowhere, and no one knew he even had stage 4 colon cancer. And apparently he had been battling it for several years. My husband, when he was diagnosed, he only lived 9 months. And so this is a very devastating cancer that is on the rise in people under the age of 50. And so I always like to remind people to get their colonoscopy. They have recently lowered the screening age for people to 45. And so hopefully that helps others, but even then, that's still kind of, that may have saved my husband, but that wouldn't have saved Chadwick Boseman. And so I do encourage you, I encourage people to get their colonoscopy. It is not that bad. I had one in my 40s early also because of what happened to Eric. And they found 2 precancerous polyps in me. And, who knows what that would have turned into if I waited until I turned 50. So I do encourage people to do that. After my novel came out and I had to deal with this crisis in my family at the same time as the book came out, I had already started writing Good Buddy, and it was inspired by my husband, because when I was a very young woman, I had a baby daughter, and then I met Eric. She was about, she was 2. No, she was not 2. Everything's leaving my mind at this point. I've gotten to the age where I can't remember anything. She was 14 months when I met Eric. So when I got married to him, she was 2. So she was 14 months, and he became basically the guy who was in her life every day. And so he raised her, and she considers him her father to this day. And so I always appreciated what he did for her, because he didn't have to. He was a young single man. He could have picked a number of women to settle down with, and he picked a very young woman with a baby. So kudos to him. But I think there's a lot of men out there like that, and they don't get enough credit for what they do for children. I started writing the novel, and then what happened to him, my novel kind of went into a different direction. And so the book really served as a kind of a memorial of a lot of things of my own family. And so I am going to show toward the end of my talk here and brief reading, a brief PowerPoint presentation, because I know a lot of you are writers, and there are some photos and memories of my own family's life that I memorialized in this book. The book was written in vignettes, and so, and as you know, they're basically small short stories that tell a larger story. And so there's certain things in the story that are actual, are tied in from memories of my own life, of my own family. And so I'm going to highlight a few of those things, just so I can, I guess, share some of those. And hopefully I'll get through it without crying. But let's see. I was going to just do a couple of brief readings about the story. The first reading I'm going to do is from early in the book, where Buddy and his mom, Retta, are on the run. They head to, they're in New Mexico. They're fleeing an abusive situation. They land in New Mexico. His mom, Retta, does not really have much of a plan, but they kind of happen upon these Mexican immigrants who run what I call the Underground Railroad. And they run an underground railroad for women who are in Mexico fleeing their abusive situations in America. And this part takes place in the mid-70s. And Buddy and Retta have just happened upon this fortunate situation. And they are sitting in Pilar Rodriguez's house. And she's talking to Buddy, and he's 9, and his mom is 29. We have a quiet system in place here in the Southwest, but it's usually to help Mexican women fleeing their homes and trying to find a better life in the States. We help women who are already over here too. I have a small place where I house some of them and their children until we get them some papers and set up with jobs or a plan to go far away and start over. What are they fleeing? Retta asked, her gut already knowing the answer. Pilar grinned at her. I think the same thing as you. She leaned back in her chair, her doughy arms sinking on the armrest. My people suffer the same things as your people, only in a different language and culture. Mexico is violent and has more poverty than over on this side of the border. But both of those things together is a dangerous combination for a woman with no options. As you know, it's a man's world, but it's even more of a man's world in some parts of Mexico. Women are merely things to produce children, cook and clean, and suffer the whims of her man. And many of the men are not happy, so they take it out on their women. Some men are like Hector. They are kind and do the best they can, but many are not. The bruises on Retta's arm and forehead hurt, and she could feel the cut on her eye stinging at the mention of battered women. He wasn't always like this, she confessed to Pilar, her voice starting to crack. He was so nice to me at first. It was later, something changed. Retta could feel the tears swell up in her eyes, her images of Kenny before the alcohol took a hold of him like an anchor around his neck, before the night terrors tormented him throughout his waking days and sleepless nights, before he lost his job because his coworkers complained about his inability to control his temper, before he became obsessed with finding someone named Han. You don't have to tell me about it, miss. It was bad enough you needed to run away and sell your car to Hector. He was a mean son of a bitch, and I'm glad he's gone, Buddy stated flatly. Retta's head jerked toward him. Buddy, you keep quiet. Buddy sat back into the couch, his body sinking deep into the cushion. Retta wanted to ask him what he remembered, but she was so scared of what Pilar would think now that he blurted that out about Kenny. You are both welcome to stay in the place that I have for my women. I have people who help me get papers and will help you get new papers if you want. I can get you set up with a job around here and help put the boy in school, or he can stay out of school for a while until you're settled somewhere. Is there no one else who can help you? Retta, with her head down, nodded gently. We have nowhere to go. We have no family left. It was a lie, but it was a good lie.
Hey, Dori, go ahead and smile. I'm going to take a few pictures of you.
Okay.
All right, ready? Okay. Let's see, one more. All right. Cool, thanks.
Okay. The second reading I'm going to do is the part, Buddy is still a boy, and Retta lives in, it's a flashback. They live in Texas, and she's married to Kenny, his stepfather, and she gives birth to a stillborn baby, Buddy's little brother. Retta walked slowly into the house, her body sore and aching. The rolls from her childbirth experience were buried under her shirt, and all she wanted to do was go to bed. Kenny held her bag from the hospital and set it down on the couch. Buddy, you go mind your mama. Help get her settled in bed so she can rest, Kenny instructed. Buddy followed his orders, walking behind his mother and into the bedroom. She seemed to squeak as she walked, a broken emptiness with each step. Buddy wondered what it must have felt like to give birth to a dead baby. And as he turned around, he watched Kenny take the bag of baby supplies, which was full of diapers, blankets, and some new bottles that they had just purchased from the store, and put it deep into the trash can. Retta slowly got into bed, rolled up the covers, saying nothing to anyone. 3 days later, she had still said nothing, but had barely moved in the bed. In the late afternoon, Buddy got into the bed with her while Kenny went to work, and he could feel her crying on the pillow. He looked at her, her dark hair long and unkempt and messy over her face, her small frame stirring slowly. And he said, Mother, do you want something to eat? Retta opened her eyes and put her hand so that she cupped his small, rounded face. Her face became stern, and her dark eyes appeared almost wild as she said, You, Daniel Jr., are my baby. You are the only baby I will ever have. You are all I have left of your father, and that makes you my everything. But he didn't know what to think about what she told him, but he felt in his heart that it was very important. He was already close to his mother. Kenny sometimes said that he was a little mama's boy, and while Buddy reckoned that it was meant to be a dig at him because of how he said it, he thought that it didn't make any sense to him that being a mama's boy was such a bad thing. Being a mama's boy seemed like a right good thing to him. And then the last part that I'm going to read is toward the end of the story, where Buddy is an adult and he is married and recently widowed. And he is in a custody battle with his in-laws over his stepdaughter, Molly. And now he is sitting in a mediation with his in-laws. Mr. Cordova and Molly have been in a normal, loving, caring, and respectful father-daughter relationship for more than 4 years. He helped her mother raise her after her biological father passed away. He has been her soccer coach, has attended all parent-teacher conferences, taken her to doctor's appointments, and signed off on her important papers as her father, Lisa began explaining, listing off all the ways in which Buddy served as a parent in an official capacity. But there was more to it than that. Being a father wasn't just signing off on a spelling test that came home and going to listen to a teacher tell him what he already knew about Molly? Being a father is who he is within everything he did, every action he took, each thought that ran through his mind. What's for dinner? Well, tonight I think we'll go with Chinese because the other day Molly said she was hankering for some General Tso's. Should I mow the lawn today or wait until tomorrow? Well, I promised the girls that I'd take them to the park after the workday ends, so I guess I'll mow tomorrow. The corner of that table looks real sharp. I better put something over that in case one of the girls runs into it so they don't get hurt. Just a few weeks ago, Buddy was scrubbing Gabby's orange vomit out of the carpet. And now here he was in a gut-wrenching custody case, having to prove that driving a kid to school on time and providing a roof over her head is enough. There were other men out there, the actual blood kin, who beat their kids or disappeared and left them to poverty and single mothers trying to pay the bills. And the ones who make all kinds of money working all the time, never bothering to ask their own kids how they're doing. And yet those are fathers. But here he was doing all the stuff you just do from your heart because you love your children, alongside of the obligatory responsibilities that come with parenting. And it's being questioned, it's being picked apart, it's being challenged, and it might not be enough for him to keep his own kid in her home. As he sat there listening to both lawyers going back and forth about what makes a father and what is in the best interest of a child, his stomach remained in a clenched state, to the point where it was almost unbearable. All the love he had for Molly and her mother might not matter to these people or to Judge Starks, and that was hard to imagine. But he thought, you've done everything right, and still, you're not enough.
Thank you, Dori.
Thank you. So does anybody have any questions?
How did you get to be so smart about hairdressing?
Well, I have a good hairdresser. Not today, but I think I just have gotten my hair done a lot through the years, like a lot of us. And I think that just life experience, I think just plays a role in weaving of the story. And then if I have any questions, specific questions about, sometimes we got to get a little bit more into the story or into the nitty gritty on something that we're not terribly knowledgeable on. And we just talk to our hairdresser.
Yeah, I thought, and I know your background and your legal background and your military background, so I knew those areas you played. You know, it was, I understood where you got that information, and of course research and personal experience. But I really enjoyed reading Buddy's point of view. You nailed. I mean, it was, and he wasn't always soft on his language. I mean, he had some harsh language, and it was funny and very very real. And I enjoyed the salty language is what I'm trying to say. But it was real. I mean, it was real, and I was like, oh my God, there's so much. It's a serious story, but there's a lot of humor here too.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. And I know reading the appendix, your late husband had the Kool-Aid and the.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like, that's pretty. I mean, I was like, that's really a unique detail.
Yeah, it was funny because Eric, when I met Eric, he did not drink alcohol, and it wasn't like a moral stance. He just, I don't know, he just didn't drink alcohol. And so he was he was still a little boy in a lot of ways when I met him. And it was just funny because when I opened his refrigerator, he had like several gallons that used to be milk jugs that, you know, he was living kind of bachelorish. And so he just had several different colors of Kool-Aid lined up. And I'm like, what in the world? What grown young man has lines of Kool-Aid? It was just funny. And it was one of those funny memories that I wanted to highlight in the character of Buddy. I mean, Buddy is not exactly my husband, but there's a lot of traits about Buddy that were very similar to Eric. And there was an innocence to Eric, a little boy in him that probably isn't every man, but those were specific memories that I had that I like to highlight in the character of Buddy.
And how does Buddy, can you tell everybody how Buddy connects to Scouts Honor? Where's the connection there? Because I know it's going to be
Oh,
very.
yes. Okay, so at the very end of Scout's Honor, she is, it's kind of a, oh, good Lord, what is it called when it's not the prologue?
Epilogue. Yeah.
The epilogue. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yes, the epilogue. Scout is at her daughter's wedding, and she meets a man who introduces himself as Buddy, and he's in his late 40s. And she just hints that he sounded more Texan than North Carolinian, his Southern accent. And he was a lawyer, and Gemma, her daughter, worked for Buddy, this man named Buddy. And so she meets Buddy and is seated next to him at her daughter's wedding. And that's all that it was just this brief meeting at the very end of the story, leaving you wonder what happens with Scout and Buddy. But this is Buddy's backstory, this book, Good Buddy. And you meet him in Scout's Honor when he's much older. But there is a part in the story that if you've read Scout's Honor, you might have picked up where he meets Scout when they're younger. I don't know if anybody picked up on this, but because I remember when Eric read the book, he goes, "Was that Scout?" And so there's a brief scene where Buddy is going to adopt a dog, and he meets a girl heading the adoption event in front of a pet store, and that was Scout. So I like doing that.
I knew she was someone special, but I didn't make the connection. So thank you for gluing it. Thank you. Yeah.
No, it's it's the only thing I did was mention that she lived in Hattleboro, which is a fake town in North Carolina. And so that's how I connected them there. But, I wanted to do that because I would like to do that in my stories, just have a small little connection, because that's what real life is like. I mean, we meet people and we may never meet them again, but, or we might see them, in some random thing someday in the many years in the future. I mean, you don't necessarily know if you've seen this person before sometimes. So that happens throughout life. So I figured, why not in my book?
All right.
Dori, welcome back. So good to see you. You know how I loved Scout's Honor. I thought it was an absolutely remarkable first novel. I was just amazed by it. And to be real honest, I like this even better. I thought the characters were so beautifully developed, and they were also lovable. I really, really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed your dual timelines, and I wanted to know how you developed those. Did you do one timeline and then the other and then put them together, or did you do them together as you went along? And was that difficult to do?
I did them together as I went along. I knew that I was going to write this book differently. Scout was done with multiple narrators, first-person narrators, and there was 3 definitive time periods that the book was written, so it was more in order. This one I wrote in third person, and then through vignettes, but so it was a little bit more complex, but I wanted to do it differently, and I wanted to show kind of matching different timelines. So, like in the first part, you've got the 70s, and then, maybe like the teenage years. So you went from the 70s to the 80s, and then for more modern time, in the 90s, and then the early 2000s, so I was trying to match them up, the timelines. And it was kind of difficult. It really was, but I did it as I went along, because I'm sure a lot of you experience this. Sometimes when you're writing the story, you don't quite know where you're going with it. And, like the way that you tell the story will come to you as you're writing it. And so that's kind of how I handled it. As I went along, each timeline told me how to write the story. And so I kind of kept them consistent within the first part and the second part. They had definitive time periods, but they were too, but I hope that made sense. I didn't even have really the only time I use a timeline when I'm writing is if I want to make sure my dates line up so that those make sense. But I did do it as I went along.
Well, it fit together seamlessly. Beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Did you intentionally have the children be the ones who were able to get true justice? Both Buddy, when he was little, shot the man who was hurting his mother. Otherwise, he eventually would have killed his mother. And then it was the little girl's letter, Molly's letter, that actually kept her from having to go away from Buddy.
Right. I think that I did want the children in those situations because the children, I tried to write Buddy and Molly that they were a little wiser beyond their years. And I think obviously children who have been through trauma are. I mean, they develop a capacity for, obviously they can go in different direction, but I think that a lot of children who have been through trauma, but they're still in supportive, they still have a very strong parental relationship or adult relationship, will develop a maturity that is beyond their years. And I tried to write Buddy like that. With his father, or his stepfather, he had to make his own peace with that because, I think that I tried to write him that it was the right thing, but he kind of compartmentalized it where he didn't even really, you didn't really know if he even remembered what he did. But then, it was kind of a glossed over, you didn't quite know what Buddy knew or remembered as a little boy. His mother never knew. They never talked about it. It was like this big secret or a big issue they just didn't address. So he got his justice as a boy, but, as he grew older, he came to understand that, as you do, that people are more complex than that. It's easy to look at Kenny as just this abusive monster, but Kenny was fighting demons that, that were not necessarily apparent even to his wife. She knew something happened, but he didn't talk to her. And he just let alcohol take him over, and then the ensuing issues that alcohol causes. So Buddy had his justice in that way, but Buddy had to make peace with his justice as an older man, and kind of find, when they learned what happened to Kenny, kind of find his own peace with Kenny, which is why I kind of ended it like I did. And it's through, and that was through letter writing with Molly. He found somebody who vouched for Kenny, the real Kenny, not the one taken over by alcohol. And then, and Molly, she wants to have a relationship with her grandparents that she never knew, but she wants to be with her father. She knew what she wanted. And so, yeah, I think that using the children and highlighting the depth of their maturity at younger ages is a part of the writing process. So thank you for recognizing that.
Hi, Dori. Actually, piggybacking in Denise's question, as I was reading the book, this is one of those books where there is a secret, and that secret, and several secrets, affect people. It reminds me of an early writer that maybe people have heard of, that is called Thoreau. He was big at the time that John Grisham was starting, and he had a book called Presumed Innocence, in which there is a secret, and the only way that I can describe it is having a secret that accumulates bad karma. And as you go through the story, since the secret is never completely revealed, things happen to the main characters. And I saw the book to some extent like that, because at the end, we are the only ones that learn completely the secret. No other person does. And the early on, that secret is what leads to a lot of the conflict in the book. But I saw it as mostly the dealing of the main character with how much he could share with everybody else what happened. And at the end of the book, especially, we are really the only ones that receive the whole story. Of course, the mother knows it, but to some extent, he hasn't shared that with Julie, the children, anyone. And that load is what I call karma in this case. So he still had to deal with that at the end of the book, in my opinion, at least.
Joe guessed it.
Right. What's
Sorry?
that?
Joe seemed to have guessed it. Guessed what
Right.
the situation was. Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's like, you know, some secrets, I think that, you know, everybody likes to talk, not everybody, but I mean, you just hear, you know, oh, you have to tell the truth. You have to tell the truth. And I did put in there somewhere in the book that some secrets are best left buried. And I, you know, in Retta's situation, she was protecting her son. She was not going to let him reveal the secret, because part of her job as the mom in this situation was, you know, she's the one, you know, she probably felt like she kept them in that situation. She brought that situation into their lives. She married this man. She did not remove herself and her son from it. You know, she subjected Buddy to this. Buddy was protecting his mother. And they were, you know, and truthfully, they didn't know what happened to Kenny. And so they never knew if he was going to come back and find them, you know, the whole, you know, that whole fear that women live with that are running away from these things. And so it was always just the secret. And then even as they became adults, you know, Buddy's a lawyer with a different identity, and he knows this about himself, but he's managed to keep it at a distance so he can live his life. But then he feels like he needs to protect his mother, and he wants to tell the truth, but she won't let him. And he's got, so there's that parental thing where you still feel like you have to do what your parents say, even though, you know, so it's just this paradox of conflicts that go on. And, you know, at some point you have to make the determination, what is the best answer here? You know, roll the dice and see what the legal system is going to do. You know, the mom, you know, could she be tried in North Carolina? You know, it was just a big convoluted mess of things. And so you know, and sometimes the secrets aren't going to be told, and the karma will play out. I mean, Buddy, you know, not ever telling Julie, and not ever, you know, Julie died never knowing this about her husband. And it does question, what do we even know about the people we're closest to?
I think that my point is that for me, that was a good thing in the sense that it makes it more real. Sometimes in some books, it's like a neat arrangement of like an accounting. You say the secret and everything ends up being well. The reality is a lot more complex. And I think the book deals with that, all the potential decisions, not like a logical A, B thing, but rather how emotionally people decide to keep a secret or not. And I think that was the richness of people like Scott Turow. They knew that people sometimes had to keep a secret in order to make their lives work for everybody, not just themselves.
Right. And I think we like to, you know, when we talk about lies and truth, I mean, we like to say that lies are wrong. And but, you know, lies are just like anything else. I think that, you know, the secrets or the lies, I mean, they serve a purpose, whether they're, you know, it's up to the individual to determine what they're going to reveal. And, you know, you don't want to hurt people. I think that most people take that position, but then hurting people also has its gradations of truth. You know, what is the harm here? You know, it's got different answers for different people. And so that's reality. And we, you know, there is no black and white answer.
I did wonder what would happen. What would happen if the mother right away at the beginning said, hey, my 6-year-old son murdered or shot him because he was hurting me. I mean, what would the legal system do with a little 6-year-old? Because to me, I mean, 6 is not like 15. 6 is still on the baby end, you know? And so there shouldn't be any punishment, I would think, at that age.
Well, I think Buddy was 9, but you're right. I
9?
mean,
Okay.
yeah, he's still extremely young, but at the same time, I mean, you're right, but this also highlights people are ignorant. You know, who pays attention to these kinds of details? I mean, and this is the 70s when women were not necessarily protected like they are now from abusive situations. You know, I think sometimes people are just living their lives. You know, Greta was a simple woman. She married young, got out of her own nightmare of a life as a child and ran off with a guy. And, you know, I mean, I think most people are just, you know, living their lives and they're not educated on these things and they don't really think about them. And then in the moment, I mean, who knows in the moment when, if your young son shoots somebody, you know, what are you going to do? You know, she just left in the night, you know, and I think that sometimes we don't know what we would do unless we were truly faced with such a crisis situation. But I think that was meant really to highlight not just fleeing and not knowing what to do, but just our own people's own ignorance, simple, you know, people live simpler lives.
See, I thought she thought maybe he wouldn't remember that he had done it because he seemed out of it at first. And so I thought maybe she was protecting him emotionally. I didn't realize until he was an adult that he actually did know.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to write some of these things vaguely, you know, like she didn't know what Buddy knew, if he remembered anything. You know, Buddy did, but that was never quite clear. You know, and who knows what memory, you know, even understanding what memory is. Like, you know, you have some people that might remember one situation this different ways. And, you know, it was better for her to just not even ask him. You know, she just never even broached the subject. What do you remember?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that was representative of the times. I think people didn't talk about things like they do now.
It was a big sacrifice for her because she had to let go of her sweet brother Frank and her mother, and you know, and not talk to them for 20 years. And I'm glad you mentioned that a few times, Dori. But now I suppose after she gets out from jail with Martha Stewart's stand-in, she can see her family again and get married.
Yeah, Joe can finally marry her because she's not, you know, she won't feel like she'll be found out now. But it is funny. I mean, when I think about like how I even tried to do that, like I tried to write Joe as this, you know, this rural guy and from North Carolina. And he's just like, this is not right. Like, I don't need to be living with a woman and not be married to her. Like, you know, his wife was deceased and he's like, she'd be rolling over her grave if she knew how I was living with shacking up with a woman, you know. But he did it because anyway, like he kind of knew there was a reason why, but he didn't really, and you know, that also highlighted, you know, not talking about things. Like he loved her, but he didn't ask her really what was the deal here.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Hey Dori, I have my usual question of your favorite sentence, but I'm so happy to see you. It's so good to see. My usual favorite sentence, but what also is your, because as writers, we have things in our books that we put in there that people might overlook. So what's like a detail or a tiny little character or something that you're really proud of that often gets overlooked when talking about your book?
Well, I think I talked about it was Scout. I stuck Scout in there. Just the little reference to her. I made that character very brief, but a little bit more rich with detail. And, you know, she refers to having a little daughter. You know, she was a rescue volunteer with a dog rescue. That's what she did. In addition to what, you know, she was doing in her hometown. And she helped Buddy get his first dog, but he never had a pet before. And his dog Bo kind of becomes, you know, as pets are, you know, a centerpiece. And Bo's the reason why he even meets Julie. You know, he takes Bo out for walks. Bo's his best friend. And Bo is, you know, I kind of joked about in the story, I guess this is turning into more about Bo. Bo is, you know, Bo was an older dog that he rescued, and kind of a mutt. And he, what was I going to say? This is what happens. My thought just leaves my head. Bo is, you know, who he walks every day. He walks Bo every day, and he sees Julie and develops this crush on her. And then Bo he's playing fetch with Bo in the park, and Julie runs by him, and that's how he reconnects with her after meeting her in the school. And Bo's kind of the one who brings him to Julie, who's the girl that he, you know, ends up marrying, and Molly, you know, becomes a father because of Molly. And so Bo brings them together, and in that moment, he, you know, to refer to your favorite line, you know, he learned in that moment his mother was right. Bo would help him meet a woman, you know, kind of a thing. And so that's Bo kind of represents that glue that life brings things to us, you know, and a pet does that special relationship we have with our pets. I did write about Bo's death in this book, which was a direct experience of our beloved general who died. We had a dachshund. When I met Eric, he had a dachshund named General. And General died from stomach bloat, where the stomach in the animal turns. And so the dog, they either have to have a major surgery or you have to put them down. And General at the time was almost 16 years old. So, you know, he would have been lucky to survive the surgery. But, you know, I related that direct experience and my daughters, you know, and everything that we did. And that was, and so I think to answer your question, Bo, Bo was a character that I was proud of, because he was kind of the one who brought them all together.
Yeah, and of course I'm extremely biased in your answer too. So of course, you know, I appreciate that. But I mean, animals are the most amazing channels. And there's actually some research that shows that people tend to look more approachable when they're walking a dog versus if they're not walking a dog. They've done research on that. So literally data to back it up, that people appear more approachable and accessible when they're walking a dog. Yay, Bo.
I would agree with that, because I am, you know, I'll say hi to people, but I'm generally introverted. Like, I'm not real like, hi, how are you? You know, but if they have a dog, I am an extrovert. I'm like, hello, can I pet your dog? You know, and then, yeah, just last night, a dog peed on my foot. So I was a little too close to the dog.
Well, there are always
you're
ways
right.
to thank you, you know.
Yeah, last month's book had dogs as main characters, and this month's book had dog with main character. So it's been a dog day summer. Awesome. Dori, are you ready to show your PowerPoint?
Yeah, let me get to it here. Let's see. Okay, back to Zoom. Oops. All right, now I've done something. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Is it sharing?
It's not sharing yet.
No? Okay.
No, now it is.
Share. Okay. So I was going to share some photos that inspired certain things in the story. This photo was of my husband, Eric, and my daughter, Allie. that there's a scene in the book where they are at the 4th of July at Fort Bragg, and a photo of the two of them comes out in the paper the next day. And so this photo was the inspiration for that part in the story. This was actually at the North Carolina State Fairgrounds many years ago. The next picture I wanted to share was when my husband was helping Abby, my older daughter, learn how to ride a bike. And so that was the inspiration for him teaching Molly how to ride a bike, because in the story, Buddy is not married to Julie. He's just kind of friends with her. They're not even dating, but he's spending a lot of time with them. And he was already kind of assuming a lot of fatherly type of roles in Molly's life. The next picture is, there's a vignette in the story called Gay Days. And this actually happened to my family. We went to Disney World, and it was in early June of 2002. And it was Gay Day at Disney, and we had no idea. And so we got out of the car and we're headed to the Magic Kingdom, and everybody was wearing red shirts. And back then there was not really a Pride Month like there is now. And so, you know, unless you're in that community, you're not really paying much attention. And I was just like, I just remember seeing all the red shirts, and I said, oh my God, I knew that Gay Day existed, but it just never occurred to me. And so it was not sanctioned Disney event. It was put on by The Guardian. And I don't know if that paper still exists, but it was put on by The Guardian. And so we get out of the car and it's Gay Day, and we're like, and Eric didn't have any clue, and he was wearing a red shirt. And I'm like, well, we're here for Gay Day. And so this is a picture, this picture of my girls in front of Magic Kingdom was the kind of the inspiration of Julie and Molly posing in front of the Magic Kingdom, like 80s rappers. And so that's what that inspiration was from. And then this was general.
Dorian, for a Gay Day, I thought you handled it really well in the time and place, and you were sensitive, but also really funny and appropriate to the character. So you handled it really appropriately, because it's, you know, it's a sensitive subject. How do you negotiate all that? So kudos to you for writing so well on that whole chapter.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to handle it correctly, and also be time, you know, the time of it. I mean, this was the late 90s, and so
Right.
People were not as sensitive about it. And you know, my husband was horrified. He was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Are they going to start doing crazy things? And nobody did anything crazy. It was, you know, there was, you know, a couple of questionable signs flying overhead, like I put in the book. But, you know, there wasn't like, you know, like, it wasn't like a parade in San Francisco or something. It was just, everybody was having a nice time. And so it was, and that's how it was. And, you know, as parents of young children who, you know, you haven't had those conversations necessarily at that time, you know, I was like, oh gosh, I hope, but no, there wasn't anything. It was just a fun day. And my girls, you know, when I tell them about it now, they're like, oh my God, you know, I can't believe you didn't, you know, say something. And I'm like, well, you guys were so little. Like, what was I going to say? And so anyway, this picture is of General, who I had just talked about. He was the dog that inspired Bo, because Eric did not have any pets growing up. His mother was not having a pet, but Eric got General as a young man, and General was our pet for many years as a family, and he inspired Bo, even though he was a dachshund. And then I did explain about the death of General, and Bo were very related. And then this is a picture of Eric and Abby, who's my oldest daughter, who he was a father to. At the time, that was in I think 1996, that picture's taken on the left. And he's showing her the Hale-Bopp comet. So some of you may remember that's when the Heaven's Gate cult said that they were going to go to a spaceship in the Hale-Bopp comet tail. And so that's what was going on in that picture. And then and then in the right side, Abby, my oldest daughter, changed her name to Eric's name. and that he knew before he died that she was in the process of doing that. And that's probably the greatest honor. I'm going to start crying. Probably the greatest honor that she could have given him. And he was fortunate to have known that before he passed away, that she changed her name to his name. So let me stop sharing that. Those are just the photos I wanted to share. I'm sure all of you, let's see, where's my stop sharing? Oh, here it is. Okay. I'm sure all of you have, as writers, many of you as writers yourself, have similar types of photos and memories that have inspired characters or events in your stories. And so I just wanted to share a few of mine. Ooh.
Let's get you to get back on your video.
Sorry, I had it in the video. Oh.
Hey, you made.
Are there any other questions?
You made me cry. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the mom, we've got Tammy Jo and Jed, and they were very realistically portrayed. And Tammy Jo is all about control, but then she disguises it as love for getting her daughter back. But I wanted to see where that inspiration came from, because I felt you handled those characters and the estrangement very well.
I appreciate that. They didn't come from anyone particular, other than just, growing older and being exposed to many situations. Tammy Jo, I mean, everybody's met somebody like Tammy Jo. And, she, like everybody who behaves like that, have their own demons. There's a reason why Tammy Jo acts the way that she does. She's always trying to overachieve. She's trying to, when she was raising Julie, she wanted Julie to fulfill her dreams that she never had. And her daughter decided to go in a different direction, and didn't, she got married to a soldier, and, she just became a kindergarten teacher. I mean, how dare she? She could have been, something that Tammy Jo thought she should have been. And so, I think that the mother-daughter relationship is a very complicated relationship. A lot of times they are rivals, and it takes the mother to grow up and recognize that her daughter is not her rival. Her daughter is her daughter. I just had this conversation with my youngest daughter about this very issue the other day. And she, I told her, I said, as my own growth as a woman, I had to recognize when I was viewing you and your sister as rivals and how that was messed up. And I needed to stop doing that, whether it be for their father's attention. I think sometimes it might be in us in some way naturally that we have to learn how to recognize that within ourselves, especially if we have daughters, that we are not their rivals for their father's attention. I wrote Jed to be the kind of man who it was just easier not to bother. It was just easier to step back and let the woman have her way. He didn't want to get divorced, so let her have her way and not make waves. But the price that he paid for that was that he lost his daughter. So what is wrong? It's like, so there's men like that too. And so it wasn't they weren't specific people from my own life, but over the years, I've developed a complicated relationship with my own mother. And so I think that may have fed into it. I'm not estranged from my mother, but there's complications there. And I think that those play out in some ways with Tammy Jo. And so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was perfect. And I know that it wasn't a complete estrangement. They still had the exchange of birthday gifts twice a year, birthday and Christmas. So there was acknowledgement in that situation. So in my case, there's nothing. Nothing. There's no. So I felt that was, and there was a lot of honesty after the wake, too, from what Buddy was talking to his mom-in-law, I guess, and with Molly. That just takes so much. That takes a lot of guts, and I don't. And I know it was really hard for a kid to write that letter. So Molly, that would hardly ever happen. But how you built up the character, she earned that letter at the end of the story.
Mm-hmm. And Molly was, I wanted Molly to be, like I said, I wanted her to, she was mature. She lost her father young, then she loses her mother. She was with Buddy long enough and didn't really have a relationship with her grandparents. So there is, she's a good girl, but she recognizes who was there for her. It would be easy. It might have been more challenging for Molly if she had a close relationship with her grandparents.
Yeah.
It might have been more complicated for her. But then, there is the added issue of she has a baby sister, and they're not going to get custody of the baby sister because that's Buddy's biological child. So, it does make you wonder, like, what is wrong with people that they would try to get custody of one child and not the other? But then there's the whole, Tammy Jo clearly feels like she screwed up, like she's not handling it right, but she's trying to do more wrong and more harm by trying to also be better, if that makes any sense. Like she knows that she screwed up and that she didn't handle things properly. She wants her daughter back, but she's handling it in the wrong way. If that made sense.
Yes, and she was the perfect antagonist to figure out the whole story. She was the perfect person, and to get the PI, Loretta, she's like, there's something odd about this guy. He didn't need a haircut, and then he takes her Diet Coke for the DNA analysis, and then Gayleen Phillips comes in and says there's something weird going on. So I like that build up of where it's heading, and also there's that nugget where they have I think at the wake, and then Buddy is saying, well, why isn't Tammy Jo talking, asking about the little baby, about Gabby? Why is there no mention? And it's only about Molly and nothing about the sister. But I guess he figured out, oh, well, that's my biological kid, so it's not really as important, or I don't know. There was definitely a rivalry between the sisters that Tammy was putting a wedge. I could see that too.
Mm-hmm. And, you think about, I know, and I do know, just because I had worked in the legal field for so long, that it takes a lot for a judge to give custody to people who do not live in this state. Mm-hmm. But it was complex because Buddy was not legally anything. Molly was an orphan legally, and they were her grandparents. And so that would be a very tricky case in reality. A North Carolina judge might give custody to the grandparents because this man, even though he's been serving as her father, he does have standing because of the role he's played, but he does not have any legal standing. And so it was a pretty complicated legal case. And I think maybe I copped out. I copped out a little bit, but it wasn't meant to be a legal book either. So maybe if I was doing a legal drama, I could get into all the complexities and what the decision would be and the reasons for it. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to put it more on making the grandparents do the right thing, and and they had to be told by Molly, this is the right thing, and she had to reach the grandfather. Because the grandfather had to be told, what is wrong with you? Stand up. Her maybe just writing. If Tammy Jo had just written that letter, it may not have had the same impact as the grandfather. And I did put like September 11th in there just because everybody was feeling so much more emotional at that time. And, kind of like the pandemic brought out, doing an internal reflection, like what are we doing? What are we doing with our lives? And maybe people reaching out to loved ones again. And, those kind of monumental moments throughout, human history make people do that. And so I had to kind of bring in, maybe make Jed feel a little bit more emotional at the time, and a national tragedy like that. So.
And Dori, you're saying about, not a lot of stories of women writers are mother-daughter, but I'm writing father-daughter in my own historical novel, and it's also about, there's a custody issue too, where the mother abandons the child, and then the father is trying to figure out, well, what do I do? And that's actually based on reality, and this is the middle of the 19th century. So there's so I've been looking up a lot of things, and in my own family, I was taught that if you're a step, you're not as important. You're like, oh well, you're not blood, so we don't have to pay as much attention to you. So it was, and that's the stuff that really bugs me. And not in my husband's family, what he believes, but that's what I grew up with. And I said, that's just not right. I mean, you're a step kid, but you're not as important, or you're a half and you're not as important, or like, oh, that's just my half brother, so he's not my real brother, that kind of thing. Or,
yeah.
So I'm glad you brought up those issues, because yeah. So thank you for that.
These are matters of the heart. You got matters of the heart, you got matters of the law, and the law has to be black and white sometimes, and that's not. It isn't always fair, and it isn't always, the way people want things. But putting the word step in front of children, sometimes you have to do that for legal reasons. I have been in a relationship with a nice man for a couple years now, and he has a son that he has custody of, and the mom lives in New Jersey, and I'm the one, who's there for this boy. Now his mom, does the best she can in her situation, and I'm not going to treat him like, I try to treat him. I also have to know, because his mom is in his life. It's not like he's been abandoned. I have to recognize the boundaries there. And but I treat him like I would my own daughters. If he skins his knee, he's going to get mama love. And, his mom can't do it through the phone. So I'm not going to treat him less than just because he's not my son, and he has a good relationship with his mother, and he needs to have a good relationship with his mother. But I think that when we treat children like they're different, regardless of what the situation is, it wounds them deeply. And I was fortunate that my husband and my husband's family never treated my daughter like that. And they will, I don't know how many times I can thank them, but they have always treated her like that. And, when Eric passed away, he's buried up at West Point, the United States Military Academy. And, my daughter is, my daughter, Abby, is in all of that. Like, the Association of Graduates contacts me. I have an established relationship with them because of Eric's alumnus status and everything else. And Abby is always involved in everything with regarding her father's legacy. There's no step. There's just no biology, but there's no step. So.
Exactly. All right, how about we take a moment and do big smiles and take a group picture? And 1, 2, 3. All right, thanks, guys. Other questions? We still have some good time on the clock.
I have a question. The question is, do writers characteristically do psychological studies in college? I mean, do you take psychology? It seems like an amazing amount of perception is required to design characters. I don't know as much about writing, but I know a lot about relationships. For instance, in my classes, I learned that relationships are either cut off, distant, cordial, close, or fused. And so I would come at, designing relationships from those points of view. Cut off is much more brittle than distant. It's okay to distance a relationship, but if you cut it off, there's something really wrong psychologically. And so it just amazes me that the detail that you devise is really so perceptive. And I'm wondering if it's characteristic to have a degree in psychology, if writers have degrees in psychology or maybe theology. My degree is in divinity. So, it's relationships. It's relationships. Y'all are more real than my training, probably. And the idea that this fact that animals open us up, I think that's all about emotions. Because when somebody's open emotionally, you feel more comfortable and more welcome. And so if you have a dog, that's going to do that for you. But do you know, I mean, I know that scientifically or from my training, but do y'all just get this just out of the blue? Is it an internal genius that you have, or do you develop that from your life experiences?
Well, I think there's a few people in this group that are
Psychologists.
have psychology backgrounds. I do not. I have a history degree. I'm working on a master's in public administration, which, I mean, I suppose organizational behavior could fall into that type of thing, trying to learn how to work with people and lead people. But I mean, I took your basic psychology course in college a long time ago, but I think I'm curious and I read a lot. And I think reading fiction, not just experiencing life, but reading fiction makes you more connected to other. It helps with the empathy piece and trying to put yourself in other people's shoes, and then recognizing those things in real life in other people. I think that I would agree that the labels that you were given, that you were just telling us about. I mean, yeah, we can categorize a lot of relationships, but I think a lot of writers are just observant people naturally. And when you study psychology, you can put the labels on stuff, but if you're just an observant person, you can just maybe explain it in a narrative kind of story, the same kind of thing without labeling it. But I think for me, I mean, I've read a lot of, it's the Pat Conroy quote that I most identify with as a writer. I write so, and this is a paraphrase, I write so that I can explain my own life to myself.
Absolutely.
And so I would align myself with that. But I'm sure some of the psychology people in the room can better answer that for sure.
I wonder what Tracy would think.
Yeah. Well, I was just sitting here thinking, I have a client at 1 today, but I'm sitting here thinking that I came at this very different, where my degree is in counseling and psychology and secondary education, but I never read fiction.
No, I don't either.
So I read I was in 6th grade getting books on self-help. So, do that study. But I think the thing is, and Dori said it, the word observant, because once I decided to write fiction, I was like, writing fiction is all about being observant, which is what you do in psychology. So it is such a great combination, just being observant. And Dori also said curious. So being curious and observant, and allowing things to come in. I know there's an author that many of us might know that his big thing, I love his Facebook posts. It's just about observing life and funny things that happen in a coffee shop and funny things that happen here. And so I think just doing that. And then Dori, what history was your degree in? What history?
Just history. There wasn't a specific period. It was a bachelor's in history.
American history?
Just history. It wasn't, it wasn't a specific history. It was just, maybe they have more specifics now, but back then.
Oh, okay.
Back when the dinosaurs were in the earth, it was just history.
Yeah. But I mean, history again is, study of people and observing, and usually shared by the winners side, but that's a whole other thing. And you can definitely talk about that, Dori. But so that's my 2 pennies, just being observant and curious.
Cool. Cool. Okay.
And I think also, I know more than I did when I wanted to write 20 years ago. I mean, I know more about life and experience, and I think it's great if you're a 25-year-old writer and you're winning awards, and I have utmost respect. And I have a client who's really young, but she's a mature thinker, and she's a reader, and she's a writer, and she's a musician. So, and she's very mature in her writing. And maturity doesn't have chronological, but of course we assume you have more years, you're going to be wiser. But I don't assume, but I know for me, I'm wiser than I was 20 years ago. I was pretty callow, I think, or I didn't have the emotional depth, and it took me a long time. But I wanted it, I wanted it. I just didn't, and my writing wasn't very good. So I think that's where, and then you also have to figure out where your sweet spot is. And I love historical fiction because it's a combo deal of the nonfiction and the fiction, and I love history, and then I love unpacking real people. So it's kind of fun, and then making stuff up. Like, well, I don't know about that person, and I was on a Zoom call last night out of Reno for my stuff, and I felt really proud of myself because I'm picking up things that the professor missed. Like, all right, I don't know if that's a good thing, but I was like, I know this stuff. I can do this, and it just gave me more belief that I have to get my work done, because it's a calling. I have to do it.
Mhm.
All right, other folks. Here's another question for you, Dori. How did the vignettes with book structure? You mentioned it a little bit at the beginning of the talk. How did did it come to you right away? This is how I want to structure my book.
Well, not right away. I just started writing, and then I came to an end, and then when I was started out working on it, it just kind of evolved that way, where I realized at some point that I was basically writing a bunch of short stories. And so then I was like, well, maybe this is how I should write the whole book. Because, it would be, and I have never done it this way, where you just write in third person a whole book without, just chapter by chapter by chapter. I mean, I really don't know how to answer that, except that I started out writing, and then I realized that at some point I was basically writing a bunch of short stories, and I didn't want them to be like each a short chapter, if that makes sense. So I just tried to make it so that each vignette would fit within a chapter, and they made sense. Like, they told the story of that chapter, and it wouldn't just be short chapters. So it was more of a cosmetic thing, really. And then it just turned into more of a flow thing.
And I thought it was a perfect design for the book, and especially with the dividing up of the years, and having the year at the top of each chapter, which thank you.
You don't want to make the readers work too much.
Well, yeah. So, but I think that's more standard now. Maybe it wasn't 5 years ago, but that's definitely. Tell us a little bit about the making of the audiobook.
Oh gosh. Okay. So when the pandemic hit, I, like all of us, were stuck at home, and I'm like, I'd like to turn my book into an audiobook. So I started doing a little research about it, and because what would happen is, at events, people would say, "Oh, do you have this on audiobook?" And I'm like, "No." And so I would lose sales because I didn't have it on audiobook. So what I did was I went on the Audible. I went through the Audible process, and you put out a call for people to submit or try out, audition. Okay, it was a whole process of auditioning, and a gentleman who auditioned what is a professional voiceover artist. So I decided to go ahead and pay him. You can do it for free. You have a lot of free options that you can try. But he was very experienced and had a lot of commercials under his belt and other books. And so I went ahead and worked with him, and he had a very fatherly type of voice because he's an older gentleman. And so I thought, well, maybe that would be appropriate where he would read it, even though he's going to be reading all my characters. But it was a book about fatherhood, and I thought that that would just kind of reinforce that. So it was a great experience. He's a very kind man. He was very professional. It was done very quickly and efficiently. Of course, I had more time because I was, stuck at home. And so what else am I going to do with an audiobook? And it came out, I released that on Father's Day a year later from the print book. I tried to get auditions for Scout's Honor, but that was tough because there's so many narrators that I'm having I kind of put that on the back burner. That's a tough one to be able to get somebody to do. So there was some people that offered maybe doing a tag team, which probably would have been better. One person reading one narrator, another person reading a different narrator. That one's a little bit more challenging, and I've got more work to do on that. So, but I haven't sold many at all. That's like a whole different marketing niche that I have not conquered. So.
Well, I got it. I was listening to a couple of the chapters going back and forth on my trips, but I think with more people driving, Dori, it's going to be more of a market. And when you're stuck at home, you can have your iPad and you can have it read to you. But I'd much rather do a hybrid version of having the paper or the Kindle and then the audio and then going back. And when I was doing Humanities Council's book talks, I said, why don't you get the book on Audible? And they look at me like, or Libra, and they look at me like, you have, weird chicken feet. I'm like, well, this is a way for you to read the book and then read the book and then, convenient. Because I was hearing all this, I don't have time to read. I don't have time to read the book. But it made it difficult. And it was a challenge because the folks would come to the discussion without having read the book. And I had to start, and then I was getting graded by how well the discussion went. So if you haven't read the book, how well will the discussion go? So I that was one of the challenges. And I said, this isn't my fault, but I was trying to make it fun. Look, this is Audible, and you can download it on your app, and you can go to Goodreads, and you can read reviews, so you have some idea of what the heck I'm talking about.
Well, Dori, I have heard that editing an Audible book is a lot harder than editing a manuscript. Did you find that?
Well, I didn't, only because the guy that I was working with was such a professional. I think maybe if I had done it with someone who was more of an amateur, it would have been, but he had a whole process in place. And all it really was a matter of, he would send me a vignette video or audio file. I downloaded them. I'd listen and I'd read through my book. Excuse me. And while he was reading it, I would look at my book and follow along. And there were some things that I would go ahead and write down, like Duplin, he pronounced Duplin, like things like that, or he missed a sentence or something like that. Excuse me. It really was not that hard. And I think it was simply because of the professional level of what I was dealing with on the other side. But I could see it becoming very challenging, especially with somebody who wasn't submitting, the audio files in a timely manner, or, they send you 10 of them and you're like, and you got to go through all of it. It was such a consistent feed, and both of us worked well together that it wasn't overwhelming at all. But it could be tedious. I could see that being tedious, honestly.
Dori, I have a question. talk about your work that you do now with grief, and how does that coalesce with what you're doing with Good Buddy? Like, how I know your life took a huge pivot. That's a euphemism from your loss of Eric, but how does that, play in with how you're looking at Good Buddy and everything you're doing for that book now?
Well, so I developed the Grieve the Bright Way workshop, but I have not done that in a long time. And so I would like to start doing that again at some point. My daughter's recommended to me that I do a workshop at an event she's doing later on this year, and I might go ahead and start doing that. But the workshop, the writing workshop, is really it's basically just prompts. And because I think that there is something lost with just typing all the time. And when you have to handwrite in a journal or something like that, a prompt where somebody provides you with a prompt, it makes you reveal things, and you don't even have to read them out loud. I mean, I think the prompt writing in grief helps you, and the prompts that are used help you cope with whatever the deep-seated losses are within you. And it could be any kind of grief. It doesn't even have to be loss of a loved one. It can be a trauma that somebody suffered. Sometimes people want to talk, but a lot of times people don't want to talk, but the writing allows them to cope in a healthy way rather than resorting to too much Netflix or alcohol and drugs. And so that was the purpose of the writing workshops, was to allow people to just cope. And I send them home with prompts so that they can do it on their own. But when you're in the small group, getting people together and giving them the time and the quiet space to go ahead and work on it. Some people want to share, some people don't. So Good Buddy was actually, ended up for me being just this, great grief project for myself to help solidify some of my own memories. And then I wrote it so my girls would have it. It was a part of my husband's legacy. And so that was a grief project in and of itself, but that was a way for me to write out my own grief. Even with Julie was a widow. She was a young widow. I wasn't as young of a widow as Julie, but there are certain things that I was going through that I didn't, when I was going to write Julie as a widow from the beginning, but I didn't know that I was headed in that same direction. And so writing Julie before I became a widow, and then after I was a widow, editing Julie was a completely different thing. And so it was actually very helpful for me to put in the book some of the things that I was feeling and questions I was asking myself, because it's different being a younger widow than being an older widow. I was kind of a middle-aged widow, but they consider us young widows, which was laughable, but I was a young widow in the room, trust me. There was nobody older than me. I'm nobody younger than me in the group I was in. And then when I was in the larger group, I was the youngest one in there. And so I faced different challenges than a lot of the ladies that I met. I'm involved with a group called the Hope for Widows Foundation. I haven't blogged with them lately, but I do some of their events. And that is a wonderful resource for widowed women that I share with, because it's for women, because women specifically deal with issues that men who lose their wives do not deal with. Men have different issues. And unfortunately, they are not tended to like they should be. The male side of it. And there's a project at UNC. I don't know if you know a doctor, his name is Justin, and I can't remember his last name. Yopp, Y-O-P-P. He has a men's group that he works with at UNC that specifically helps widowers. And the group wrote a book, and that so men have their own issues and women have theirs, and Hope for Widows is for women. And so I don't know, I'm kind of rambling about this whole thing now, but Writing is a tool for grief. And I think that that's my whole purpose of the Grieve the Right Way workshops, is to tend to that part of people, that it needs to be written out. Because grief needs a voice. It needs a voice. It's going to come out one way or the other. So. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, Tracy, as a psychologist.
No, but it's a great way of putting it. And there is actually a type of therapy called narrative therapy.
Okay.
So you actually go to a counselor and it's about telling your own story. So there's many overlaps between this, but I mean, the service that you're providing with your workshop is really important, Dori. That's really, really important.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Dori, what are you
Excuse me. Also, like the way it preserves the story. I think when you lose someone, you're afraid of letting go of the memory. You know, you have to hang on to that grief so that that person doesn't get lost.
Mhm.
And if you write about them, it might kind of package that grief and that person in a way that you don't feel like your memory has to keep grabbing onto them. It kind of lets them go and it frees you. I'm wondering if that's part of it, because to me, a person is a story. Every person is a story.
Mhm.
And it's really takes a lot of perception to understand different stories. Most of us just relate in terms of our own experience, if we've known anybody like that or experienced anything, but there's this whole world of experience we don't know. So if you can put it in, this relationship, this lost relationship in writing, you kind of preserve that story. And I can see how that would be really helpful, writing just for anybody. Because when my dad died, I wrote 72 pages and it helped me get through it.
Mhm.
So I'm just thinking how this all relates to story and loss. And I like the way it's obviously worked for you, Dori, beautifully.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I agree with you 100% that people are stories. I think it's J.K. Rowling that says in the end, or is it somebody author like that said that in the end, we're all stories. And it's true. And the stories, I think that everyone likes a story. We have many ways of telling them nowadays. But I like the writing them, and journaling is a very helpful tool. It doesn't have to be about you. It can be about a memory that you have, or about a loved one, or about the kind of day you had. I mean, and that's all it is storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we all do as writers and artists, and Alice, with your music, it's storytelling. You're telling stories.
So true.
I'm telling stories about people who've died, and I want them to live. And there was one that I just wrote recently, that it was speak my name so I don't die all over again. And then at the very end,
Wow.
so it's a story. There's a lot of parts, but the main thing is that the little girl loses her mom at age 3, and she is 16 years old at this point of the song, and she is wanting to figure this out, and tell her rescuer, who's my character, why didn't you stop her? Why didn't you do something? And then she understands, okay, well, the reason she left us girls to be orphans was because she wanted to be with our dad when he died. Okay, there's that. And then when he's dying, her rescuer's dying, she still has artifacts from her mother. So she's remembering her mother, and he's telling her to remember her mother. And then when he's about to die, she says, well, I don't have anything of you. And he says, you do, because I've taught you how to be kind. And you retain that, and your mother taught you to be kind. And then at the very end, I say, speak our names. I think, wouldn't that be cool, just to actually say the names at the end of the song? So yeah, so that's, but if you come to my show, I can sing it for you.
I have one comment that I just